Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Tech Talk. Today's topic, feature management. My name is Janice and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams Live Events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to be a part of a recorded session, we ask that you please disconnect now. Attendees may access the web conference recording within 72 hours via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We do have presenters standing by to answer your questions throughout the session. Now, on to the show. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Principal Program Manager Mike Faulkner. So without any further delay, Mike, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Janice. Okay, so today we're going to talk about feature management. I'm Mike Faulkner. I'm a Principal Program Manager with Microsoft. I've got my colleague Chris Gardy taking notes and answering your questions. So please freely ask questions as we go along. I'll pause a few times to answer them for us. I got to show this disclaimer. Please read it. We're going to show you stuff. It's as is. This feature management is already delivered in Platform 27, 10.0.3, so it's coming out right now. But we are making a bunch of changes to it to basically finish it up, add extra features that make it more powerful. So just want to let you know that everything I talk about could change, and I just want you to be aware of that because I will be talking a little bit about stuff in the future that we're going to do. So you're aware of that as well. I can show you this feature, but really what we need to do is talk about the kind of the bigger picture of all this stuff. And so feature management, which is what we're talking about today, is kind of part of a bigger picture called feature exposure. And feature exposure is made up of three elements. There's the concept of feature release, which is something Microsoft controls. There's feature management, which you guys get to control. And then there's feature enablement, which means after everything's turned on, you enable a feature and kind of like the old days. And so let's talk about each of these first, and then I'll talk specifically about feature management and what we did with that. So feature release, another term for this you might have heard is called flighting. And feature release is something Microsoft controls. So when we create a feature, we may want to have this feature, we want to make it, might be big, it might be special, but it's something we have made a lot of changes perhaps on it, or it's larger, and we want to make sure it works, but works really, really well. And so we might want to put it out, release it out, but release it to maybe 2 or 3 customers, or maybe 4 or 5 customers, or a group of customers, but gives some of our customers a chance to really exercise it in their environments and really make sure that we've done this the right way. And so what happens is we can put this thing called a flight around the code. It's kind of like, think about it as an if statement around the code. If this flight is turned on, then you can use this code and it will show up in your menus and do stuff like that. And so that flighting is completely controlled by Microsoft. You're normally working with one of our program managers to kind of get approval to use that stuff. But most of our customers won't see the stuff that's flighted. Again, Microsoft controls that. Feature management, which is what we're going to talk about today, that's where you control it. This is a feature that we have released. It's fully finished. It's released. It's in your environments, but we want to give you the chance to control it. Part of the whole one version thing that we're doing is that we've promised the world that when new stuff comes out, you have control of it. So that you'll be able to see the changes that are made. We won't break your systems. We won't surprise you. We will show you what's going on and let you opt into it. Feature management is that method of letting you opt into features. Again, these are features that are released, they're completed, and it's a matter of you wanting to turn them on or off. So the term we use is enable those features. System admins will be able to enable them, but we also have 2 new roles that we added. One's called a feature manager, and one's called a feature viewer. So the feature manager can be anybody that's given this role, and it gives them the ability to turn on or off features. It does not give them the ability to use the features or change the parameters or do anything like that. It's just simply an on-off switch. So you can delegate the administrative experience to maybe a power user or a set of power users that want to enable features. And then feature viewers are people that can actually see what the list of new features are. Because most of your users don't necessarily need to see the list of all the features. There's a group of folks that are kind of controlling how this environment works and what's shown and what's not shown. So anyway, it's role based. The last one over here, feature enable. This is kind of like the old world where we didn't control the features. They really just showed up on your next release. And in that case, feature management and flighting can turn on something, and then those things are just available to you. So like a parameter is out there for you to turn on. So if you still want to control stuff by legal entity or control feature capabilities, you can enable or disable parameters which are then still turned off. So the point of it is feature management and feature release gets you to the point where you see parameters, forms, menus, things like that, and then you still can do things there to configure your system. So that's kind of the overview of feature exposure. The one we're going to talk about today is feature management, and let's get started on that. And then once I explain what's in 10.0.3, then we'll stop briefly for questions, and then I'll move on. So as you see, there's a big red bar in the middle here. Plans may change. Frankly, plans have changed since I created this deck. So point of it is I'll tell you what we've got. I'll show you what we've got. I'll tell you about the future plans, and they may change because we've got to we've got a lot of things we want to add before we kind of call this thing good for a while. So let me move this out of the way and explain a few things. What you're going to see. So what you're going to see is a workspace that allows you to enable, disable, and reschedule and schedule features. So you can turn it on, you can turn it off, and you can schedule it for the future, and you can reschedule it for the future. You're going to be able to filter your list, so you'll be able to see the new features, and the new features by definition are anything that you got since the last time you got an update. So if you do updates every month, the new features will just be last month's features. If you skipped a release or you skipped two updates for some reason, then you'll see all the features since the one you had before. So if you skip 2 updates, you'll get a list of 2 updates worth of new features. That's what defines it as new. Once time has passed, it'll move to there's a tab called All, and you'll be able to see all of your features no matter what. Then we have a tab for showing you what's not been enabled, because you may choose not to enable something for a period of time. You can then just view the ones that you haven't turned on, so you can do a little filtering there. You'll be able to view the features that are scheduled in the future. Some companies want everything, want to turn on everything right away, but some companies are, hey, let's do some change control, let's train our users, let's get everybody used to this feature coming in, so they schedule it in the future. We'll show you which ones you've scheduled in the future. And then we're also going to show you the mandatory features, and I'll explain that in a minute. On top of that, when you're in this feature form, we have a link to the full documentation. So when we finish our features, we will have documentation available by the time you do the PEEP builds, which is that first ring after we release, that test release, so that partners and customers that are part of our early adopter programs can actually read the documentation about the feature ahead of time. So we will have that prepared right away. We'll also give you a little hint about the feature, tell you what it's done. And then we actually allow you to put some comments on the feature. So, hey, we're not going to enable this for 3 months because we got to train the accounting department or whatever. So you'll have some place for comments. And one last note before I show you the feature. It's actually an API. This is a call. The feature teams in the code will call feature management and say, am I turned on, yes or no? And so that API will not be available to ISVs, partners, and customers immediately. We've got a couple more releases to do. There's some big things happening where parts of this is moving into the kernel, kind of a big bunch of stuff happening. We don't want everybody, using our old stuff and then having to switch to our new stuff and breaking things. And so we have not opened this up yet. We're hoping to do that by the fall, which would be in a couple releases here. We'll let you know. But for now, it's really it's locked down so that we can continue to update this feature for a couple more months here. If you try to use it, you will get a compiler error that'll tell you that there's a problem. So just be aware that you will get to use it in a couple months. So probably by fall. But let's just we will finish the feature. So let me show you this. First of all, I want to see if there's any questions hanging out there. Nope, no questions. Great. Okay, so I'm going to actually go to the real software here. That's what everybody wants. So when you come in on the next release that you get, anytime you have platform 27 or 10.0.3 for the 10 users, you're going to see a new workspace. It's down here in this case, at the bottom of the screen. It says feature management. You'll get a little toast that pops up and says, hey, feature management's brand new. View the list of features that enable them. So if you click on learn more, this documentation is actually out there right now, so you guys can go out and look at it and read it. Talks all about feature management. Talks about the workspace, how it's set up, how you do a feature. But that whole learn more button will take you to documentation. So as you see it in the feature, that's where you want to go. You'll get to the actual documentation. So I opened up the workspace, and here's what I got. It's actually a pretty simple workspace. That's what we tried to make sure it would happen. And actually the look of it is changing already. So not big, but it's changing a little bit already. Notice you get a list of features. So these were the features that came in the release. You get a date that it's enabled. If it's blank, it hasn't been turned on yet. You'll see this little icon right here, and the icon will change based on the kind of thing you can do. So I'll show you that as we go along, but in this case, this feature is mandatory. You must have it, and so it's locked and turned on. We won't do that very often, but there are times like feature management where we just have to force the feature on. That should be an exception to the rule. That shouldn't be something we do all the time, because again, we don't want to force something on you unless it's so important that we have to do that. So you got the feature, the date that it's going to be enabled, or it is enabled, the date it was added to your system, and the module that's affected. These are just filtering fields for you. Notice at the top we've got folder for what the new features, what features have not been enabled yet, what features have been scheduled, and then a list of all the features that you've received on this system. So you can actually filter on not enabled. There's just 2 of them that have not been enabled. So let's take a look. I'll click on this one over here, the first one. On the right-hand side, you get more information about the feature. Again, see this Learn More button. If I click on Learn More about the bank revaluation feature, I get right to the paragraph that says how to enable foreign currency revaluation. So again, that Learn More button is very important because it shows you, it takes you right to the documentation and helps you set up the feature itself. Also, you'll see down here, there's a little, in this bar, there's a little bit extra information. It tells you what the feature is going to do. This feature will enable bank revaluation for all legal entities. And then down here, you can actually do some comments. So, maybe enable this next week, something like that. All right, so as you can see, this feature has not been enabled, and there's no date there. When you get a feature like that, you'll see a button up here that says enable. So if you click on enable, you get a date. If you just keep today's date and enable it, now you'll see this little green check mark right here. That means the feature's been enabled. It tells you right here on the right-hand side, this feature was enabled on this date. So you got a little bit of an audit trail. And look on the upper right-hand corner. Now you can push the disable button. Most features are designed to be able to be turned off and on. However, we will ship some features that say, if you turn it off, you can't turn it. If you turn it on, you can't turn it off. And then we will give you warnings and little reminder. We'll tell you about it so you don't accidentally turn something on. But there will be some features that you can't turn off, and then they will get the lock icon. If I push the disable button, the icon goes away, the date goes away, and now the feature is disabled. If I push this enable button again, but when I pick a date, I pick a date way out here somewhere, like 31st, and enable it. Notice the icon has changed. So now the icon is a timer. And what that really means is that this feature is scheduled for a future date. If I go over here to the scheduled tab, notice that there's one item listed for scheduling, and it will turn on at midnight on that date. And that date is the date of your server, your AOS server. So it'll turn on your system, whatever your system date is. It'll turn on midnight of that with that time. Now notice the button is changed to reschedule. Maybe you went, oh, I should have done that earlier, or we're not ready yet. I want to reschedule it for a later date. I can simply just change this to the 30th and reschedule it. I can also turn it off here at the point if I made a mistake didn't want to schedule it, I can also disable it with the same screen. So I reschedule it. Now it's rescheduled for May 30th, and we're ready to go. So I look at this feature here, I might just want to enable that one. So we got all of our stuff enabled. And so now here you can see on the screen, here's the 3 different kind of icons that you can see. The clock means that it's scheduled for the future. The checkbox means it's ready to go. It happens immediately. You will have to, when you enable a feature, you do have to refresh your browser to make sure that everybody can see it, that you can see it. But once that's done, it'll be on. And then the last one says the lock, which means it's mandatory. And you can see over here it says this feature was made mandatory on April 25th. So that is all there is to it, frankly. That you get a list, you turn them off or on, and again, I want to repeat, you're enabling this feature to be used. And so what enabling does is, in our code, we have these magic if statements, and the code says if, make a call to this feature management. If this feature is turned on, then show a menu, show a form, allow a process to be available. Anyway, whatever that if statement can turn off and on and make sure happens, that's exactly what happens in the API. So all this is turning things on and off. It is not configuring the feature. It's something we're thinking about, but it's not configuring the feature. It's not turning on a parameter. It's not it's not doing any of that work. It's just an on-off switch that turns things on, and the code can then look at it and be aware that it's on or off. So that is all we have on this part of feature management. Before I go to the what's next slide, I'll see if there's any questions out there.
Yep. Yes, I've just been answering a couple of questions. So someone asked if the feature enablement has an impact on user personalizations. I mentioned not really. Personalizations is a separate delta to the user experience.
Yeah, so the question is about, does this affect your personalizations? No, it does not. I mean, and I'll kind of answer a question that's implied there. What happens to your data, et cetera, like on, off, that kind of stuff. So it doesn't affect your personalizations. They still sit there, but just again, there's this magic if statement around the code. So if the thing isn't visible, you're not going to be able to see that you moved it or whatever like that. The field won't be visible as well. And then your data is still there. It just isn't there anymore. I mean, it isn't visible anymore, but your data is still there. Your fields are still there. It's just they're not visible anymore. If we have a feature that actually, if you turn it on, it's going to change a bunch of data. It's a big feature. It's going to move a bunch of things or do something to the point where we don't want you to, we need you in that new area, then we would make it mandatory and you couldn't disable it. But if you can disable it, your feature the data should be safe, your field should stay there, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a question about the mandatory features just now. They asked if there's some way to avoid turning on mandatory features.
Okay, so is there a way to avoid turning on mandatory features? Well, again, we won't do that. I mean, it's frankly the only one in this release right now is feature management. The reason they're mandatory, the criteria for mandatory is if we don't turn it on, we're going to hurt you more than if we don't turn it on. So we will make a decision whether or not something is mandatory. But like again, our promise is not to change your world and give you a chance to get used to it. So mandatory would be kind of a pretty serious deal. Like if you don't turn this on, you're going to get hurt, or like feature management, we got to have this way to manage features. We can't do anything about that. We have to. But we will not do mandatory features very often, and I would be surprised if there would be one in every update, frankly. So it's a very, 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 very seldom used thing. It's a thing we have. It's available for us to use as a tool to help make sure you don't get hurt.
Yes. There was a question about the what's new page. They were asking if let me just get to that. Whether every paragraph on the what's new pages will become an item in feature management form, and I basically said yes.
Yeah, so if there's
more, right?
Yeah, so feature management is actually more granular, a more detailed list than actually what's new, because if there was say there's a bug or something, or you've reported something, or there's a minor feature adjustment where to solve the problem we had to add a button or maybe put a new message up or change your user experience, we have to feature manage it now. So you'll see a lot of smaller features in here too that wouldn't kind of reach the bar of what's new. It's the, what's new is kind of the little larger things. But if, for example, if there's a new warning message because, we've found out that people have used something and they kind of fall into a trap and make a mistake because we didn't warn them or something like that, and we want to add that warning, we still feature manage that warning for you, but it wouldn't maybe reach the bar of a whole what's new page kind of thing like that. So you'll actually see more here than you'll probably see in the what's new environment.
Right. Someone was asking about whether the feature management page will show multiple monthly updates if they, for some reason, skip.
Yep. So will we show multiple monthly updates if they skip? Yeah. You get what's new. The new list is like if the release, if you're on release number 1 and you go to release number 2, you're just going to see that's the new stuff. That everything new for number 2. If you're on release number 1, you skip 2 and you go to 3, you're going to see everything that's new for 2 and 3 in the new list. And then when you go to 4, the new list kind of moves off to the all list, and you just get the new stuff between 3 and 4. It's so as much time as you skip, everything in between there becomes new and available to you to look at. The all page is going to just be a kind of a forever list of all the features that you've ever gotten. So you can always get to a feature. If you skip a couple releases and then you decide to kind of still hold, if you hold on a feature for another release after that, another update, it'll be in the all list, and frankly, it's in the not enabled list too. So you can kind of control, like here's the new stuff, but hey, I want to see what I haven't enabled yet, and let me take a look. And that's everything that's not enabled. And then, oh, well, I remember a feature from way back when. I'll go to the all list and I'll go find it. So you've got some pretty good filtering on that as well.
Yeah, you've already answered the one about big new features or small changes as well. So yes, both. And then is there mandatory features? Sorry.
Okay, that's what I want.
A lot of questions. And then, what happens with the data to the data linked to the feature if you disable it? You mentioned that remains, right? Yeah,
no, the data still. So what happens if we disable a feature? There's still data there. Mm-hmm. In fact, the learn more is still there. I mean, it's not like anything goes away. Your data is still there. Again, the only time we would ever make something, like turn it on and then becomes mandatory, or you can't go back kind of thing, would be if it's going to be data damaging, if to go back. So there's times when we introduce something pretty big. In the future, we're going to have this concept of deprecation right now as well, where we say we're going to deprecate, we're going to get rid of this feature, or we're going to do something, and we want you to use that feature, but we have to give you kind of 12 months notice, and it's 12 months notice from the fall or the spring release. So what we're going to have built into this later is this concept of there's a feature in the future that's going to be mandatory. Here's the date it's going to be mandatory. It will show you in this list what date it'll be mandatory. That gives you time to prep for it. And then we're going to come up with the ability we're going to warn you and let you know. And then at some point in time, it will get turned on, but it's going to be way out in the future. So that's kind of the way mandatory is going to work.
Yeah, someone was asking if they'll be able to, if they install in a year's time, if they'll see a whole list of features that they have to go through one by one. I mentioned that there'll be an enable all button.
Yeah, so I think it's time to go to the what's next.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, somebody was asking if I load this in a year, what am I going to see a year's worth of features? Well, you are, but we're going to add some stuff to make that easy to work with. That's why, again, I talked about changes happening. We've got some key changes that we got to make, so that's why we're kind of locking it until we're done with those key changes. So let's take a look at what's next. I'll move this thing out of the way. Again, here's a reminder, this big red button. It is things are changing. So what are we looking to do in the future? And some of these things are pretty close to done. Some of them are in process. Dependent features. As this list gets longer and longer, we're going to add this new feature, but hey, there's a feature over there that if that isn't turned on, this other feature really won't work. It kind of doesn't make any sense, or it might break. So we're going to have the concept of dependent features. So you'll click on a feature and it'll say, oh, hey, by the way, you can't turn this one on unless you turn on these other 3, and then we'll turn them all on at once if you agree to that. If you don't agree to that, you just cancel and get out of it. But if you agree to it, then we will turn on all the features that are related to that one so that we can make sure that there's good integrity and everything works the way it should. Installation settings. when we were talking to partners and customers, about half of them said, I don't want to deal with this. Just turn everything on. Just do it. And then the half of them said, oh, don't ever do that. We have change control groups. We have teams that want to talk about these features. Should we take them or not? That kind of stuff. And so they wanted everything off. So we turn everything off by default, but we're going to have a button that says, for my installation, everything that comes in also gets turned on automatically. And we'll have that capability here in the next month or two, I think. So you'll be able to choose for your installation which one. Enabling multiple features, yeah. And so if there was 25 features, it's kind of silly to click the button 25 times. We're going to let you do a select all or select 4 or 5, and then we're going to tell you we're going to tell you if there's any dependencies in those features, and then we're going to let you turn them all on at once. That we're not going to let you disable them at once. I think disabling everything all at once could be probably the worst thing we ever did to you. So you still have to disable one at a time, because we want you to think about this disabling. That's kind of an important thing to figure out. Automatically enabled at a future date. Again, that whole deprecation concept, you probably want to read up on that and make sure you understand it. We can go out and announce that we are going to deprecate something. We will no longer take care of it, and then it will disappear 12 months after a major release. And so we don't have that capability in feature management today, but in the future you'll see another column that will say, on this date, this feature will become mandatory or will disappear. And so just be aware of that, and we will be adding that to this feature management. The last one is data entities. Most people will test everything in their sandbox, and they'll turn on this and turn on that and do this and do that. What we're going to do is we're going to give you an entity where you can export those settings and then go over and import them into your production environment. We're not going to allow you to add features with an entity. We're just going to do updates, but you'll be able to say, oh, you decided to schedule stuff and things like that. We'll take your date, the fact that you want to enable something. We'll take the fact that you want to enable something in the future. We'll take all that data. We'll bring it over. You bring it over to your production environment, and you'll just import it like a normal data entity, and that'll update your production environment. Okay, so that's what's coming in the future. Got any more questions coming from the crowd?
Yes, a lot.
Good.
Yeah, the data model is separate. Someone was asking what happens if a feature requires a data update to existing data. I mentioned that the configuration forms is still the place to do that.
So the question is if there's a data update required, one of the things we're looking at in the future to do is to actually have a actually let you configure as part of this feature as well. So, but what'll happen on feature management today is if you have a feature, but it also requires kind of a data upgrade, probably what the team will do is they will have a parameter or a form or something that will do that upgrade, and all this feature will do is enable that, and then somebody will be able to push a button that'll do the data upgrade or form, do the data transfer, something like that. We're actually looking right now at be able to say stuff like, a developer can say, if this isn't true, like if this table isn't populated or if this config key is turned on, then we won't let you turn on this feature yet because you haven't done your data upgrade or stuff like that. We're really thinking hard about how we allow you to move forward on that, especially for some of these new acquisitions that we've done.
Someone asked, will this feature be combined with flighting?
Oh, good question. So yeah. Is this feature combined with flighting?
I mentioned that flighting is about feature release, and once it's released, then you can see it.
So like I said before, flighting is something Microsoft controls, and feature management is something you control. Today, if you look behind the scenes in the technical side of it, you'll see two different APIs. One talks to a service that we have internally, and then one talks to this information. Those are being merged. That's another reason why we're not releasing it into the wild yet here, is those two are being merged, and so that the developers, instead of two if statements or an or statement on one, but an or kind of concept, that they'll be able to make one call, and that call will look at flighting, that call will look at feature management, and no matter what, whatever our services look like, they'll get a enabled or a disabled answer back. There'll be one call for the developer. So that's why we're being a little tight-fisted here about not letting it out, is that we've got to get those two together. We want you to be able to simplify it and make one API call. Remember, I don't know if I mentioned this, but flighting is one thing that Microsoft controls. feature management is something that you control. You don't have to have both. You can have flighting. Normally, if you have flighting, you're probably going to have feature management, but you can have feature management and not have flighting. Microsoft does not flight every feature that we create. It's only for usually larger features that we have some concerns about the complexity of the changes. We really want to get some testing out there to, people help us test it and stuff. And so we might flight something there, or it's a very, very risky feature that's very important to you, and we flight it so that if something really, really goes bad, we can turn it off. But normally feature management, everything will be feature managed and only a few things will be flighted.
Yes, someone was asking about the SQL flighting that happens right now, and I said that flighting will change and be fully controlled via a service in the future.
Yep, so there was a question about SQL flighting versus what we're doing here. In the future, like I talked about, we're mixing it so there'll be a single service that the developer calls and says, am I on? It will look at flighting and it'll look at feature management. And if either one of them's on, you're on. So that's the way it'll work.
Yeah. Some of the other questions.
Another question?
Would this replace switch to enhanced form, the UI change pattern that got used in some places?
Yeah, switch to yes. Okay. Will this replace switch to enhanced form? Yes, it will. That was because we didn't have feature management. Actually, that's probably in data management. That was my brainchild. That was probably the first feature in data management. That new form there was probably the first time, probably 2 years ago, or whatever it was, that we had to have that concept of how we're going to deal with one version. And the enhanced form thing was okay, but feature management makes it much, much simpler, and we don't need parameters. That was our biggest problem too, is adding a menu, adding parameters. We were adding parameters to data entities, and it just wasn't a good way to go. So this eliminates all the concept of having a parameter that turns it on and that kind of stuff. So there won't be enhanced. The feature might say, ledger settlements. The feature is new ledger settlements form and functionality or something like that. And then what that would do is that would go ahead and, instead of going into ledger settlements today where you have to say, enable enhanced version, this would turn on the enhanced version, and all you'd have to do is do the setup.
Yeah, someone was asking if it needs to be in maintenance mode to enable features.
No.
That it just happens on the fly.
Does it need to be maintenance mode? No. And this isn't replacing config keys at this point in time, but it acts a lot like it. No, you do not have to be in maintenance mode to do this. All these features have to, you have to refresh your browser, but you don't have to be in maintenance mode.
It's a fairly simple question. What's the definition of a feature?
Definition of a feature is whatever the feature team decides
Right.
is the definition of a feature. Again, the promise to you was we're not going to surprise you, we're not going to change your user experience, etc. So it's almost like internally we kind of say, would it break a task recording, or does it surprise the user when they're in the form? It's something they didn't see yesterday. If that's true, then that's feature managed. So we've got some bugs. We go like, wow, that's real tiny, but nope, we're changing the user experience. We need to feature manage it. So because you don't see our emails obviously, but we do get emails from customers that are like, you just changed my life, and it was just another button, or like that. But they've gotten very upset. So that's our promise, is not to upset people and not change their user experience.
Yeah. Question: do features become mandatory at some point for customers who don't take them?
Do features become mandatory for customers that don't take them? Again, that's that whole deprecation thing. If we tell you that we're going to deprecate it, we're going to deprecate the old behavior, or we tell you that we're deprecating the old feature and the new feature will take over, then we will force it in the future. Other than that, no. Any feature that doesn't have that, if we don't make that statement in our deprecation what's new area, if we don't tell you that, the feature never has to be turned on. Now in the future, we'll come up with another feature, and it's dependent on something else. We're going to tell you you can't have the new one without the old one, the other one. And so, we're not going to force you, but on the other hand, you don't get the new one if you don't take the older one as well. So, that's kind of your choice. But we'll let you know if it's mandatory well before it becomes mandatory.
Yeah. Question about can we enable the feature only on one legal entity?
Okay, so we get that question a lot. Can we enable the feature only on one legal entity? We did discuss this a lot. That is something we're looking at. I think a lot of people want that. We didn't add it yet, and I don't think it'll come shortly. So this turns on the feature across the board, across every legal entity. It turns it on. If you want to control it by legal entity today, you will have to create a parameter that says, on off in that legal entity. And then you can do the same behavior that we do with feature management. If you want to do it by legal entity today, you have to create another parameter. The new bank foreign currency exchange for bank does it that way. And then the feature I showed you for bank was actually to turn that off. So if you enable that feature, it actually turns it off and make sure that every legal entity gets it, no matter what that parameter is. And so if you decide to do it by legal entity, you're going to have to set up a parameter. Feature management will open that parameter and make it visible, and then people go one legal entity at a time and turn it on. In the future, we want to have that as part of this configuration capability where you'd actually go in there and say turn it on and only turn it on for these companies. Because I know there are people that want to release this for like 2 companies and everybody gets used to it and then they release it for the rest of the world. We understand that requirement, but it's just not there yet.
There was a number of questions about the relationship between feature management and configuration keys. One mentions seems like no DB sync is needed, which is a difference.
Okay.
One mentions, are we going to get rid of configuration keys?
Okay, config keys. That's a lot. Everybody asked that question too as well. This does not replace config keys. It acts a lot like it, and we might in the future, do something like that. But this is not a config key. This does not require maintenance mode, all that kind of stuff. But it kind of has the same kind of if statement in it and all that good stuff. For example, we have purchased some IP out there, and we're taking off the config keys and we're putting feature management around it before we release the new functionality. So we are doing stuff like that, but we're not getting rid of the concept of config keys at this point that I'm aware of. It's just that this is simply an on-off switch that the code can call and say, am I on or off? Which is kind of like config keys does a lot of stuff automatically, and this is more of an if statement. In the future, we might be able to use this to do the automatic stuff, but right now it's just they're 2 different things. But we're not getting rid of config keys that I know of. So.
Yeah, and then part of that same question was whether it'll be possible to define new features, whether ISVs and partners will be able to do that.
Yeah, so can partners, ISVs do it? That's what this little note below here is. Yeah. It is designed to be an API, and really kind of technically what you have to do is you have to create, there'll be a class. The class name will be the feature ID. And then that way we make sure that people don't reuse the same ID. But there'll be and you'll put when I show you this screen, like this little blue bar, the class will have this name, feature management. It'll have the module in it. It'll have a forward link to the documentation, and it will have this little label. This will be a label, so it'll get translated. And it has a couple, 3 or 4 other pieces of information in it. Is it mandatory? That kind of stuff. So as developers, you'll create this class, and then every time we do an update, we will interrogate, and this class will populate this information, and that's how you will become a user of feature management as a partner or an ISV. And even a customer can create their own features that they want to do. You just have to wrap your code with this if statement that says, am I turned on or off? Am I enabled? And you just set up this information, and your feature is now part of this environment. You'll go out there and you'll actually see the API out there. It's got a V0 on it. If you use it, you are putting yourself at risk right now to breaking yourself on the next update. We will be getting rid of that API and putting out a permanent one. So that's why I'm telling you on the phone here, do not use our API yet. You can play with it, toy around with it, but don't use it yet, because it will go away and become a new API, and then that's the one we'll give you to use for your features.
Someone was asking if deprecations will be listed in the feature management page as well. I said, yeah, features can add or remove capabilities.
So there's deprecation can happen a couple ways. The way this is going to work in the future is you could get a feature that is not only a new feature, but deprecating an old feature. And then so you'll see the new feature and then a deprecation date of the old feature at the same time. However, there are already features out there that have been released and they're already there. So then you'll see a new feature come out, and then you might see later on a deprecation feature which says we're going to get rid of whatever feature, and you'll be able to get rid of it immediately, or you'll be forced to get rid of it in effect when this mandatory date shows up in the far future. So there'll be kind of two different ways the deprecation will show up. We're never going to surprise you. We're trying to figure out things like, how can we email the administrators and the feature managers, and how can we pop up warnings? Or, we're trying to figure out how we're going to tell you millions of years ahead of time that things are going to happen.
Yeah, someone was asking about regression testing of new features, whether that's needed or not.
So do you need to regression test new features? Yeah, I would. Yeah, yes, you do. I mean, we are going to turn on all this stuff and make sure things work with it. We have to make sure it works without it. We just have a team of people that go out there and validate each release. But the only thing this does, we used to release these features and not give you a list like this. We would just release and they would just show up. Now we actually have the capability of turning them off or on. So they come out turned off. We can test our stuff, and then we turn it on and we can test our stuff. And that's how we do our regression testing.
Yes. Will there be guidelines for ISVs on how to design the features correctly? I said eventually.
Are there guidelines? Right now we have an internal wiki in the plan for our developers. And so what the plan is once we open this up, that I showed you that learn more and it took you to docs and that kind of stuff. In docs, at the bottom of it, we're going to add a developer section, and we're going to tell you what the API is, how it's called. We're going to basically give you the same kind of documentation we give our developers internally, so that you'll be able to develop to it, because we definitely want you to do it right. The guidelines are pretty simple from a requirement standpoint. You've got a class, you've got an API, you've got a feature ID and a description and some help. That's the basics of it. Behind the scenes, it's an if statement with an API call, and then we're going to give you the details behind that.
Yeah, someone was asking if there'll be an effect on performance with so many if statements. I mentioned that it should be a simple cache check, and removal of those checks will happen when feature becomes mandatory.
So is the if statement going to add a lot of performance? All the feature management and like flighting and all those things are all cached and stuff. So there should be no effect on the capabilities. Again, what happens is people say we're going to deprecate something. What really happens behind the scenes is in the release that we deprecate or get rid of something, we actually pull the if statements off. And so the feature is enabled mandatory, it's just going to show up. But that's kind of behind the scenes what happens. But again, that's 12 months from like October is the first time we can really do that. So we got time to get you more information on how that's going to work.
Yeah, so kind of a loaded question. My understanding is that with one version, the idea was to have all customers on the latest code. Now with feature management, all the new hot fixes and features will be disabled by default. So isn't the idea of one version lost, or am I missing something here?
Oh,
so it's kind of going back to the...
Is one version lost here like that?
Yeah.
No, this is really a core tenet of one version, which is we're not gonna break you, and we're not gonna surprise you. And most of the time, these new features are actually breaking changes features. We're breaking your UI. We're changing we're changing the look. The feature management is going to just give you the ability to kind of phase it in. But no, the code's there. The code's executable. We have to test with the code. Yeah, I guess you could argue, but you are all on the same version. You just don't have things turned off and on.
Yes.
So the difference we would have is, like, instead of putting it here, I would put it as a parameter on a form, and you hadn't turned it on. So yeah, I get your point, but I think all we're doing here is putting more of the control in the hands of the users, but we are shipping the code. It's all there for everybody to use. And if you are a feature team and you've got to have something else required to turn on, you have to turn on feature number 1 so the feature number 2 works. Now you have the capability of forcing that to happen and making it something that people have to do. So I think you got more flexibility here than you had before.
Allows for gradual exposure of features, and you've mentioned there were switches like the enhanced view and parameter switches that did this in the past, and now it's just consolidated in one place with links to documentation.
Exactly, it's all in one place now. So I get your point. You are all on the same version. You've got parameters, in effect, parameters turned off is what you've got.
Right. And then, I don't know, did you mention license keys? So will license keys, like catch weight, will that eventually become like a feature?
So will license key and become features? Pretty much anything that's flighted, like the catch weight. Well, if you're looking at features that we had in the past, we're not going to retroactively go back and turn things into a feature so that you can turn them off and on, unless there's just a massive demand for that, like the program managers have decided it was so big that we want to go back. What we're doing instead is, like I showed you on that one screen, we released bank foreign currency revaluation, but we released it with a parameter for every legal entity because we didn't have feature management available. We went back and created a new feature called get rid of the parameter so that you can turn it on with one button. So we could, if there's a big demand for it, we could have a feature out there that says, basically change the behavior of some other feature, change the behavior of a feature we've already released so that we don't have to type in the parameter anymore, or we don't have to do this, and it's just on. A program manager can do that. It's really up to the feature team if they want to go back to older features and make them optionally turn-onable or enableable. Other questions?
About 40 of them.
40 questions. Poor Chris is worn out. So that's all. We're way over time. So thank you so much for sitting in on this tech talk. Janice is going to publish this out, so you'll have that information and the Q&A and everything else. And we really appreciate your attending and learning more about it. Go ahead, Janice.
All right, thank you, Mike. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a brief moment here and bring your attention to a link that I just posted in the Q&A panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you'd like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. Attendees can access the web conference recording via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Mike and Chris, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.